The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, an angry countenance. It's better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share these verses together from Proverbs chapter 25, verses 23 and 24. I guess the second of these verses is more famous than the first, and it's actually repeated among the Proverbs. It's better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman. I find this proverb interesting in that Solomon doesn't seem to condone divorce here. He's not saying it's better to get a divorce and leave the woman behind, but he is suggesting that it's better to give her a little bit of space than arguing all the time. The houses in Israel typically had flat roofs. It was kind of their garden area on the roof. You could store stuff, maybe grow some pot plants or whatever. And the suggestion here is rather than living in the house with a woman who is wanting to argue all the time, give her some space and move up onto the roof. Set up a little camp there, rather than having arguments all the time. This is the way that God deals with us. He tells us what he wants us to do, but if we don't do it, he gives way to our will, knowing full well that we've made choices and we must experience the consequences of the choices that we have made. And so in Romans chapter 1 it says, "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, because what may be known of God is manifest. God has shown it since the creation of the world. But although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, and became futile in their thinking. Professing to be wise, they became fools. They changed the glory of the incorruptible God to an image made like man. Therefore God gave them up to uncleanness. And then God gave them up to vile passions. And then, as they did not like to retain the knowledge of God, God gave them over to a debased mind." And so our modern society today has people who know the righteous judgment of God. People who practice such things are deserving of death, but they do them, and they approve others who do them. Ultimately, there will be a day of judgment, but the opportunity is provided for repentance and for us to experience for ourselves why God set the rules which we have broken. The other proverb we're looking at, though, is, "The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, an angry countenance." Of course, in Australia we're in the southern hemisphere, so the weather for New South Wales in particular comes from the south. It's a south wind that brings the rain, or doesn't bring the rain, as the case may be. The cold wind brings the rain. The rain is a blessing, but the cold wind that brings it can be a nuisance. A backbiting tongue, an angry countenance. So he's saying that if we speak roughly to a person, critically, with accusation, we generate anger, typically because the person that we are speaking to is not able to solve the problem. In this regard, my thoughts went to Genesis chapter 30. Jacob had deceived his father, Isaac, into giving him the blessing his father had intended for Esau. And Esau was very angry about this. Isaac sent Jacob away to get a family, and he went to his uncle Laban, Rebekah's brother, and saw beautiful Rachel, his cousin, and requested to marry her. He worked for 7 years to provide the dowry, but after the wedding, in the morning light, saw that his bride was not Rachel, but Rachel's sister Leah. As he had deceived Isaac, now Laban had deceived him. He was very angry, but Laban said, "Well, you can marry them both." And so he also took Rachel as wife. and was committed to working for another 7 years for her. When God saw that Rachel was loved but Leah not, he gave Leah 4 sons. Jacob wasn't equal in his treatment of the 2 wives that he had. At this time there wasn't a law against 2 wives, but it was not God's pattern, because there would be rivalry between the wives. Nevertheless, it didn't treat them equally, and God blessed Leah to try and rectify Jacob's attitude. And when Rachel saw that Leah had 4 sons and she none, despite all the attention Jacob had given her, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." Now it was God who had withheld the children, it wasn't Jacob. And Jacob was very angry. He had done much more for Rachel than he had done for Leah. Am I in the place of God, who has withheld you from the fruit of the womb? He had done what was in his power, but it was not in his power to grant a child to Rachel. This led to Rachel sending her maid Bilhah into Jacob, who had 2 sons in Rachel's name, and consequently Leah sent her maid Zilpah into Jacob, and she bore 2 sons in Leah's name. And then God gave Leah even more children, but in the end Rachel did have 2 sons, sadly dying when Benjamin was born. There was continual strife between the 2 women, because they refused to work together. And this links us back to our proverb. The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue to an angry countenance. We are called to live at peace with one another, particularly within our own household. But if we're all the time criticizing, all the time complaining, then that doesn't engender peace. That engenders frustration and anger and makes it hard. And so the second of our 2 verses, how do you respond in that situation? And the only way you can respond is to back off a little bit to try and reduce the intensity of the conflict, but without giving up your responsibilities. Jacob cared for his children, although they caused much frustration, and God in the end, for Abraham's sake, blessed all 12 sons to make them the 12 tribes of Israel. Sometimes the pain of the experiences of life all end up having a positive outcome in the bigger scheme of things. But nevertheless, it's much nicer for us if we can live our lives at peace rather than with contention, with backbiting. Indeed, Jesus urges us in the Sermon on the Mount to be very careful about the words we use when speaking to one another. He said, "You've heard it was said, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, will be in danger of Gehenna, the fire of hell. Therefore, when you bring your gift to the altar, if you remember your brother has something against you, leave your gift and go quickly. First be reconciled to your brother, and then bring your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly, lest you be delivered to the judge and to the prison." God allows us to rub shoulders with difficult people, even in our own family, so that we might learn patience, so that we might learn love. Because God has to deal with us, and we are difficult people so often. But he continues to love. He continues to provide. He sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. As much as it depends on you, live at peace with all men, especially the household of faith.